through KTTeeV. This is KT, and I'm coming at you live with another episode of the Daily K Podcast. And on today's episode, we have Mr. Todd Nesloney from Kids Deserve It, pushing boundaries and challenging conventional thinking. How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for having me here. I've been looking forward to this conversation, so I'm excited to get to kind of chat with you some today.
I think about your role in education, coming from the teacher to the administrator, to your role in TEPSA, which we'll talk about more. I'm honored to have you here, man, and just so thank you. As we jump into things, can you give me or the audience a little bit of background about you and your role in education at this time?
Yeah, so I was a teacher for 7 years. I taught 4th and then 5th grade. I loved it, got super active on social media, started getting recognition for some of the stuff that I was doing as a teacher, got to meet President Barack Obama, do some work with the White House, and I got my master's my second year of teaching, not because I wanted to use it, but because I wanted to be the first person in my family with a master's. And so I swore I'd never be a principal, and then my 7th year of teaching, I got a Twitter direct message asking me if I'd like to come work in a neighboring district and be a principal. And so after meeting with them and falling in love with what they said, I took the leap and was a principal there for the last 5 years. And then in July of 2019, I took my new role with the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association as their director of culture and strategic leadership, because I felt like, and they felt like, one of my big strengths as a school leader was being able to build a strong, positive school culture.
Now, the big part about that is the places that you were an administrator, and that was Navasota.
Yeah.
Yes, and so I taught and coached at Rudder, and so I would go down there, man, and we played football against Navasota, and it was pretty rough, man. We leave out of there in a bad mood, man. So, it's just awesome, man, until even Texas is so big, but still it's so small, and the connections that we have, without even knowing each other. Even Brenham just coming down and how they beat up on us, too. Okay, I'm going to go on another way, man. I'm getting hurt here. All right. And so with the meeting of Barack Obama and the White House champion of change, how did that go, man? How were you even called for that?
Oh, it still is such a surreal experience to me because, I didn't even know that there was a such thing as champions of change. When Barack Obama was president, he started an initiative called the White House Champions of Change. They were not solely for education. They recognized all kinds of people from all kinds of walks of life, usually about 10 to 15 at a time. And I guess there was some sort of application process on their website. And so somebody submitted my name for some of the work that I had done with helping secure a $100,000 grant to provide devices for all of my 5th graders that had Wi-Fi or cellular data built in on their devices to give them access in a very rural area. And so when we got selected as the champion of change, they're very much of you can tell no one. You've got to fill out all this paperwork. You got to do a background check. You've got to send in your license. And I mean, it was like hardcore. And they made it very clear from the start that because there is so many champions of change events, the president does not show up to very many of them. He's very busy. So we are not telling you he will be there. He sometimes makes a decision last minute to come, but you just need to prepare yourself that he's not going to be there because that's much more likely. And so we led up to the day, and I remember going there the day and having to go through like 5 steps of security to get in the room, and they pulled all of us into we were in a very small room, and they pulled all of us off to the side in a holding room to talk to us beforehand, and we all noticed like, okay, this is supposed to start at like 2 o'clock, and it was like 2:05, 2:10, 2:15, and the lady came up and she was like, "I'm so sorry, we've been delaying. We're waiting on something." And so all of us are like, "What is going on?" I mean, typically as you can see with politics, anytime anybody says they're going to be on the TV, they're never on time. So we were all kind of assuming that, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like all this press rushed into the room, and we were all like, "What's going on?" And so our handler, she said, okay, we didn't want to tell you till it was for sure, but President Obama is coming. He's going to be here any minute. So y'all need to be prepared. You'll get to shake his hand. You'll get to meet him. He wants to speak for a couple minutes. Hold it together. And we were all like, what? And so we go back in the room, and I can remember so clearly him walking out and standing behind the podium. And I got to tell you, the stupidest thought came into my head, because I thought, oh my gosh, it's the guy from SNL. Because at that time, there was a guy on Saturday Night Live who did impressions of him that was so spot on, because it didn't register in my head that the most powerful man in the world was in the same room as me. And honestly, I don't remember anything about that event. And I'm so thankful it was recorded and that my wife was there, because then I was able to watch it back and go, oh, I shook his hand. He said my name. He took a picture with me. Like those cool little moments. And it's still so weird to me as an educator, knowing that I'm not doing any different work than countless other educators. And so at times I really struggle with this idea of, I don't deserve the recognition when there are people who give up far more. I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and it kind of led to that. I'm grateful for it. I'm thankful, but I don't take it for granted, and don't ever view myself as an educator who did anything better than anyone else.
I understand totally what you mean. It's like I say, everything is grounded in the trenches. But sometimes that recognition means a lot. And
Yeah.
but people who are deserving get it. So, man, congratulations of that, man. So as we move on and talk about your role at TEPSA, for the audience, can you explain a little bit of what it is, and then why did you want to move from your campus into the role with the culture?
So, I'd been a principal for 5 years at the same school, loved what I was doing there. The work wasn't without its trials, but that goes for any position that we are in education. And there were just a series of events that really made me feel like I might be wanting to do something a little different. And I didn't know what at the time. But I knew that as an elementary principal, I was a member of TEPSA, and I loved what they offered. I loved their conferences, their materials. I mean, I really felt like they were a great organization. So I actually met with them and said, I'd love to work for you guys. And together we built a brand new position at TEPSA. So being the director of culture and strategic leadership, there was nobody who came before me. So they knew that I brought a strength in social media, and they didn't have anybody who could be fully focused on that. They knew I brought a strength to graphic design, which is an area that I love, that I never really developed enough because I was so focused on being a principal. And they knew that I loved speaking and presenting about building positive school culture, and I had a foundation already built that proved that what I was saying was something that was practiced, wasn't just read about. And so they offered me the position. I ended up taking it, and I have loved working for them. Before working for them, I didn't realize they have literally 14 employees who serve 5,000 to 6,000 members. I thought it was like this huge organization because there were so many members, and they're like, no, that's why we all do like tons of jobs each. So that's why you're going to be doing tons of jobs each. And so I've got to do a bunch of different things, but I've loved getting to build up their social media presence and share their voice with more people and kind of grow that area, but also kind of focus on how as an association we can be pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone. And so me being younger and me being a new voice to the group, we've really got to try out some new things, and they're all on board for testing out new stuff, which is why I love working for them too, because it's not well, we've done this for the last 100 years. They're always okay, tell me more about that. What's your idea? Let me think about it. And that's all it is. Like, I don't need somebody to say yes to everything. I don't ever want to work at a job where somebody says yes to everything, but I want somebody to say, tell me more. Let me just think about it. And then if you come back and say it's not the right time, or no, we don't want to do this, great, you listen to me. That's all I care about.
Yeah, and the biggest inclination of something that's good is even the people who were able to create the position for you said that this is important enough to create the position. So that's a step in the right direction. Now, moving to the kids deserve it. I was looking at the TEDx, and what I do on my campus is I do the boys club. And so this is, it's wide. And so even before the pandemic, I was slated to speak at some more boys clubs in other districts. How did you come up with the kids deserve it and the three pieces that you talked about on the TEDx?
Yeah, so I had been pursued by a publisher to write about some of my experiences in education for about a year or two, and I never felt like I could. I didn't feel like my voice was important enough. I didn't feel like I was secure enough in my own ideas and experiences. And I met another educator at a conference in Long Beach. We hit it off. And during one of our conversations, we were talking about, why can't you do that? Why can't you think outside the box? And then the comment was made, well, because kids deserve us to do that. They deserve it. And both of us were like, oh my gosh, think about it. We could really challenge other educators under the guise of we should do that because kids deserve it. And then people can't come back and say, well, kids don't deserve that, because obviously we're not going to want to say that. And so we started writing together, saw that we wrote really well. We played off of each other. And so I went to my now publisher and said, hey, I know you've been asking me to write something for a while. Here's an idea. What do you think? And he said, love it. Submit a manuscript. We'll see where we go from there. Ended up submitting something, not thinking much was going to come of it. Like, we had a goal of like 100 books in a year to sell. And it blew up, went wild. We did not expect it at all. And it was just a really powerful experience. And, as that brought new opportunities for me, one of those new opportunities was a TEDx. And that was probably one of the scariest things I've ever done in my entire life, because it is recorded. It is live broadcast. It's part of the TED team. Like, I was stressed to the max. And it's timed, and your slides are, it was, whew. And so I thought, I'm a storyteller at heart. I feel like that's the way you break down the walls of others, is you show vulnerability and just tell your truth. You tell what you've been through. And so I thought, of course I want to fall it under the kids deserve it mantra. And so what do I want to cover when I talk about that? And one of the things in my kids deserve it is a story of my grandmother, and that was the very first time I had shared that publicly with my voice. And so I really felt like that was the opportunity to introduce that story outside of being written in a novel. And then I decided, I really want to share about our Dinner with a Gentleman idea, because not only was that a really powerful experience for me, but it's also a great example of what failure can lead to. Because when we tried to do something to bring men into the picture, it failed dramatically. Crashed and burned. 2 men out of 800 kids showed up. Like, it was a non-starter. And so we really had to go back to the drawing board. And then what came from those ashes was Dinner with a Gentleman, which our first year alone had close to 600 men and kids show up. And so it's a powerful story of trying again, picking yourself up. Just because it doesn't work the first time doesn't mean it's not going to work the second time, but just the importance of not giving up on parents and kids.
And so after that book, from me looking at your work, it seemed like things have taken off. Talk to me about some of the books that you came out since then, even the one from this year, which is your first children's book.
Yes. So, about a year or so passed from Kids Deserve It, and it was very successful, and the publisher really wanted me to write something else. And I said, I don't know that I have anything else. Like, that was my heart on the page. Like, I don't know what else I have to say. And then I went to my publisher and I said, and I don't just want to put another book out there. If I'm going to put a follow-up to something really successful like Kids Deserve It, it's got to be different. And I didn't feel like I had anything different until I was sitting down with my team one day, was listening to them share their ideas of what they were doing in their classrooms, and I was blown away. And I thought right then, oh my gosh, I have an idea. And so I went to my whole staff and I said, I've got an idea. Every school talks about how we should write a book about the things we go through. I said, my publisher wants me to write something. I want to write a book about our school, Webb Elementary, but have all of you submit little vignettes to go within my book. And they said, yeah, we're on board. So I pitched it to my publisher. My publisher loved the idea. And so that was my second book, Stories from Webb. That's why it's because it was a Webb Elementary. And I wrote the whole book very similarly to Kids Deserve It, but every single chapter features stories from the nurse, the head custodian, the teachers, instructional aides, secretary, like all of them are in there. And what was started as a book for other educators became so much more, because my favorite chapter in that book is called It's Okay to Grieve. And in that chapter, we have 4 vignettes from 4 different educators on campus. One shares about suffering miscarriages. One shares about the loss of her grandmother in the middle of a school day when she gets the phone call. Like things like that that made it where it's about life. Because, our teaching is a big part of us, but it's not our whole life. And so I think that's what makes, out of every book I've written, that one I think will always be my favorite, because it is so personal. It's so different. And I find that when people read that one, they tend to say this is our favorite too, because it's got something for everyone. And then that led into me writing Sparks in the Dark, which was my third book, because I have had such a huge passion for literacy and literacy instruction and rethinking that. So I wrote it with a secondary teacher out of North Carolina, so that it could be a book that's filled with how to build a love of reading and writing into kids and adults. So he covers the secondary side of things, and I cover the elementary and whole campus side of things. And that book was really special. In March, I was thinking if I had a copy right here, but I don't. In March, my first children's book came out, Spruce and Lucy. I self-published it, so I took a new leap there. So proud of that book. That book is 15 years in the making. So proud of that one. I hired an illustrator out of Indonesia who did all the illustrations for me. And then actually, just last week, my new book, When Kids Lead, came out last week. My buddy Adam DeVico and I started a conference series called Get Your Lead On. And through the work we were doing together with that, we're just sharing ideas of ways that we were building up student leaders at our schools, and thought, let's write a book. So we wrote a book about how to empower, inspire, and grow young leaders. And it was such a blast. And I love this book because we got to have a teenager write the foreword who's doing incredible things. Instead of having your typical endorsements of the book, we went and endorsed kids across the country who are doing fantastic work to advertise them. We have quotes throughout from kids of all ages about what leaders are. Like, this is a book I'm super excited about, and just came out a week ago. So
thank you for just taking the time, man, to pour back into what you were born into, which is the education part. And because, like, for me, this will be my 5th year going into AP, and so I'm just learning, just working, and it's always that hunger to know more. And so thank you. Just gave me a little summer reading to do here, man. So the podcast, Tell Your Story. When did you start that? Was it a while back and you picked it up? How did that go?
Well, I have done several podcasts in my career. My first podcast was Edu All Stars. We did 99 episodes. That morphed into Kids Deserve It. We did 100 episodes. And then I took a break from podcasting for a little bit, because I felt like what I was doing was a copy of what so many others were doing. And again, I want to lead in a new way. I don't want to just be what everybody else is doing because it's popular or it's connecting. And so then in 2018, my mother passed away. And so that was a big changing point in my life and in my career. And it was a very unexpected, very emotional thing to go through. And I remember somebody encouraging me to speak about her, and she was an educator as well, and to share her story. And so the Stories from Webb had been out about a year from then. Um, and so there was all this talk of me seeing the value of stories and me seeing what happens when we get vulnerable enough to share pieces of ourselves. And so one day I just turned on my live and I just talked through the story of my mom and shared that just really vulnerably, cried on camera like a little baby. I was so embarrassed, but it was one of those things that I was like, if I'm going to be vulnerable, I have to be completely raw and vulnerable. And it just resonated really deeply with a lot of people. And it was my reminder right there of the importance of each of our stories. And as I began to connect with more and more people, I began to find that there were countless people who didn't feel like their story mattered or didn't feel like their story measured up because it wasn't as dramatic as somebody else or anything like that. And I thought, no, like you do have a story to tell. You do have a life to impact. And so that's where the idea of Tell Your Story began is I wanted to interview people about life. Yes, oftentimes we talk about education. I mean, many of my guests are educators, but not all. And I've made it a very concerted effort that not all of them are because I wanted to be a life thing. So yeah, we talk about like, how'd you get started? What have you learned? But then we always move into a little bit deeper of a conversation. I mean, we've had conversations about foster care, child abuse, miscarriages, addiction. We've dove into all of that, and you know, it's been so successful and has resonated so deeply that even in the last month, I've been able to get like Matt Paxton from the TV show Hoarders came on, and Shuby from the Netflix series The Circle came on, and Jason David Frank, who was the original Green and White Power Ranger, came on. And so I've been able to kind of broaden into bigger circles and just bring people together. And it's so funny. I'll reach out to guests all the time and say, hey, would you like to come on? I've seen you share this. I'd love to feature that story. And the response 90% of the time is, why? Like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, nobody even knows who I am. And I said, it's not about anybody knowing your name. It's the idea of you telling your story so that somebody else can come alongside you and say, me too. And thank you for sharing that. And I don't feel alone. I don't feel like I'm the only one going through it. And that's been the joy of doing the series, is to be able to bring people together to share things that help us see that we're all in this thing together.
That's it. That is, we are all in it together. You know, I just listened to your story of how you got back started on it. And, you know, I'll say it all the time. It was two tragedies that happened in my life. The same way, and so out of this came like my daily quotes of inspiration, you know, because it was one to suicide. So then maybe somebody will see this and that'll give them an extra day or want to reach out. So I make sure I do that every day, even on break. I've been getting up to make sure it's done, and the podcast, because I'm from Shreveport, Louisiana, you know, and so my biggest thing is how do I get information and all the resources I have in the 5 million people city back to a 300,000 people city. And so here we go, you know, and so now they were able to just learn about all of your work. And so did my friends who are at principals who don't speak to people, you know, just in that they get to hear this and, well, maybe this could work in my school, or, you know, so all of those things, man. So I appreciate you for running the same race and just trying to get the word out and change the culture for people, man. So what's next?
Well, you know, I mentioned Get Your Lead On earlier, and my buddy Adam DeVico and I just held our very first ever Get Your Virtual Lead On last Friday. We had about 1,500 leaders from around the world join in and be part of that, and I got to bring in some of my favorite people on the planet to speak and share some things, and that was really powerful. And so from that, seeing that there was an audience who was interested in that kind of learning, you know, with COVID and us not being able to get out and go anywhere, we have this fall, we are debuting Camp Lead On. And so it's got a whole camper theme, like a summer camp kind of theme. We are breaking it down where it's going to be a whole fall conference. And so you can either attend the entire conference, or there's going to be 5 different strands. And so we have a strand on mental health. a strand on curriculum and instruction, a strand on culture building, cultivating leadership, and equity and social justice in schools. And so we have gathered together about 35 people from around the world who come from all types of backgrounds and experiences to just share their knowledge in bite-sized 20 to 30-minute videos. This isn't like an hour and a half keynote. Nobody can sit through that at a computer. Good Lord. And so we have these bite-sized pieces that we're putting together. So we've just begun. We announced on social media last Friday during Get Your Lead On all the presenters. And so now we're working on just kind of building the schedule out and getting that out to be registered for. It's not open yet. And so that I'm excited about. I'm going to continue some speaking. A lot of it's virtual now because of the limitations, but I know that this fall I still have a couple on the books. We'll see if they don't go virtual as well. But going to continue that, spreading the word of the book When Kids Lead, because we're super excited about some things with that and kind of getting that out there. And, I think for me too, it's with everything going on in our world today, I want to continue to learn and unlearn ways to be a better advocate, to address my own biases and fragility and things that I was raised with, whether intentionally or not, so that I can be an ally for all groups. And not just those that look like me, sound like me, were raised the same way as me. And, I've spent the last year and a half, 2 years really diving into that myself. But I know that work is never done, and I still have much more learning to do. But I really feel like with the deaths of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and and the countless others that have been named publicly and haven't, I feel like those of us who have platforms, we have to be using those platforms to spread information and not just our own voices. And so, like, even with Tell Your Story, for this entire month of June, I've made a very concerted effort where I've only featured educators of color, because right now my voice isn't the one that people need to hear. I have a platform. I have enough opportunities afforded to me as a white middle class male in America that now I can be stepping my platform to amplify their voices. And for me to show all the great things happening and the ways that we can learn and unlearn what we've been through and to make our world a better place. Because if we truly believe and say that we are for all kids, and if we truly believe and say that we are for all teachers and all families, that means you have to be able to say things like Black Lives Matter. You have to be able to use your platform to speak out against injustice, to speak out against racism, to amplify voices louder than you're amplifying your own. And it's not work that I'm perfect in. And I have a lot of people who hold me accountable, which I think is important for anybody listening. If the circles that you're in never hold you accountable, your circle's not wide enough. And so I have people often who say, you should not have tweeted that. You need to, don't just take it down, apologize. And then I take that and I have to learn. And it's uncomfortable and it hurts my feelings sometimes. And then I realize my feelings are seated in my own white fragility. And so as I work through that and realize, get over yourself, Todd. This isn't about you. And so take that moment to learn and grow and be better. And I think that's what I really want to spend my entire future on, is growing myself and using my platform for that. But knowing that I'm never going to reach the fully learned stage, that there's always going to be more for me to learn.
Yeah, that was one of the big things in College Station. Matter of fact, my year of administration and my internship, one of the books that the administration team was reading was motivating minority males to achieve inside and outside of the classroom. And so then the work from that was really teaching the staff the difference between empathy and sympathy for minorities, African American kids, and so that is the work that I started way back in 2012, 2013, which is now still 2020, and so it's got bigger. Learned more about it, but it's still all about raising that awareness, because even in my role, we have our gender biases, our racial biases, and it was just something that we grew up with. But we worked through them. So I appreciate you for putting in that work, man, and using your platform to be a conscious effort. Because I think it takes everybody, and the only way that we can get through this is by having those difficult conversations that will make us uncomfortable, but hopefully we'll have a better understanding, because I know it's so fast that people say it's not what I believe and I shut it down. I don't want to hear it. And I don't believe we progress like that. So thank you.
Well, and you brought up a really good point too, that something I have said for years in my presentations and in my stuff online is, if you're not uncomfortable, you're not learning.
Yes.
And so that's the reality of it, is you have to be uncomfortable to be able to learn and be willing to admit that you were wrong, or that you still have more work to do. And nobody likes admitting they were wrong. Nobody loves being uncomfortable and seeks out those opportunities. But especially as educators, we have to.
We have to, man. We have to, because like I said, with the role that you got, equity, my district, I think last year just did a big, they hired a company, matter of fact, to do an equity, study, research. So they had surveys going out. Of course, the COVID, so everything's kind of slowed down as far as getting back the results and things. But everybody's looking at that now, equity, and how's your culture and how are you treating people? Because, when you don't, this is what we get. And at some point the rage boils over, and whether that's your students or whether that's your teachers who sit on opposite sides of the break room, all of that, so those are things we have to think about, man. Wow. Okay, that was deep. Man, and so now, before we close it out, if someone wants the books, they wants to hear the TED Talks, would you please just give them the contact information?
Yeah, so the easiest way I tell people is, if you just go to my website, toddnesloney.com, and you can just Google Todd Nesloney. You don't have to spell it right. As long as you get close, it's going to pop up. I am Tech Ninja Todd on most of the social media, and you can connect with me anywhere that you're comfortable with. My website links to all of it, but you can connect anywhere you're comfortable and kind of dive in there. And so all my books are available on Amazon, and so you can check them out there if you're interested as well.
Then I sure appreciate you taking some time today, Todd.
Of course.
Man. All right. Well, that will do it for us. This is KT for KTTeeV signing out. 100.